Pasquale, and you know this, your father is the most important guy that we don't talk about. You know what I mean? Like he's kind of that cutoff of Gotti, and like if people that know, like it's like there's two guys that go to the gym. The guy that goes to impress the girls, and then the guy that goes impress the girls and the guys. The guys are like, holy shit, I want to be like him. Right. That was your father.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So anyway.
Exactly. When John was there, when they were kids, John and Nicky Carrazzo and all of them, that was their guy. He was that. He's the guy they look up to. He's the guy that was the tough guy in East New York. I mean, Charlie Wagons, don't get me wrong, he was a tough guy too, but he was a lot older than them. You know, they identified more with my father. They liked his style better than Charlie's. Yeah. And actually, if Nicky and John would have got along, John Gotti might have winded up with my father. But there was some teenage friction there, and that's why them kids in East New York split up, and some went with Charlie and some went with my father. So,
and then I know your father got made by Anastasia. Right. Was Carlo grooming? Like, when Carlo's not an idiot, right? Or wasn't an idiot. So he knew Castellano was the right move because that was a better move, you know, for the family long term. Was your father being groomed as well, as far as you know?
I mean, first of all, Castellano and Carlo Gambino were first cousins.
Yeah, and that's the same thing. They
married first cousins. They married brothers and sisters. They married first cousins. I think Carl Gambino more wanted to keep it in the bloodline. Them Sicilians are big with bloodlines. Correct. That's why he nominated Paul as the boss. And I think he knew that Neil was very old school and wouldn't go against him, like would honor his wish, which he did against everybody, you know, and nobody really liked it. Yeah. My father was groomed by Charlie Wagons as a kid to become a wise guy. He wasn't groomed to become a boss. I mean, he was groomed. He always told me that the smartest guy he ever met was Carlo Gambino. Oh, wow. The toughest guy he ever met was Albert Anastasia. He always told me that. He told me when Albert Anastasia used to walk in a room, people would stand at attention. Wow. But he said Carl was the smartest person he ever met. But yeah, he was groomed. He was groomed from an early age because my grandfather unfortunately passed away in 1932 when my father was only 6 years old.
Oh, wow.
And at that point in time, my father's close friends, their family were all mobbed up. East New York was all mobbed up. Yeah. So my father's closest friends were all mob guys, and he was always in their houses. He had no father. So at an early age, he started hanging out with Happy Mayone's brother-in-law, Joe Dodona. He was driving him around. Like, that was his introduction actually into the mob. And then he got in trouble. He got drafted and he got in trouble. And then he went to Leavenworth for being he got in trouble in the service. Then when he got out of Leavenworth, he was only home for 6 months and he got rearrested. And then he went upstate New York and he did a couple of more years. Wow. And that's when he came out, and that's when him and Tony Lee, his partner, started robbing poker games. And that's how, and then he got hooked up with Charlie. So he started getting groomed at an early age to be, but you know, it's funny you said that, because I was thinking about this yesterday. My uncles all had jobs. All his brothers were legitimate guys.
Well, that's an old school thing. Yeah.
Except him, and he was the youngest one in the family. So he was the baby of the family that became a street guy. And my uncles, one of my uncles had a legitimate job, but he also Shylocked on the job, and he was a bookmaker on the job. Yeah. But my other two uncles, his other two brothers, were strictly 100% legitimate, but they were older. I think it had a lot to do with his age because he was so much younger than them.
Yeah, he didn't care. Yeah.
So,
and now, when there was like factions and stuff, was your father kind of with Neil?
Yeah.
Before he passed?
When Neil passed away?
No, yeah, well, so I think Neil passed away, and your father passed away.
My father was in prison when Neil passed away.
Got it. And then, if you don't mind me asking, I kind of feel like, because I come, hopefully if you watch the show, I look at the business end. I try to remove like the morality and the ethics and just look at the business end of things. And I kind of feel like your father lost a political war in the family. That's like, okay, was up there. And it's like, if you're Gotti or you're whoever, you can't keep him around. He's too powerful. Yeah. He's too important. But I got to make him happy. Let's go to Florida, do your thing. Right. Like, I kind of feel like he lost a political war.
Yeah, he did. He lost a little political war. And when he made the move to Florida, he told me He says he wants to go change the scenery before he gets himself in trouble. That was what he told me. So he went to Florida, but he never, a matter of fact, he didn't give up his position in New York. I mean, he was in Florida, but he was still with fractions in New York. He didn't like side with the fraction in Florida. You know what I mean? Like he did business on his own down there. Like
correct.
There was another captain down there named Joe Paterno.
Yeah.
He was friends with him, but and there was Fat Dave. I mean, he knocked around down there, but he never left. His heart was always in New York with the crew in New York.
Now, but then Tony Lee, another guy, I would put number 2 on the Giuseppe. I would put him a number 2 on the list of guys we don't talk about. But then he kind of seemed a little bit more political and malleable, and he kind of hung out. He was good with Gotti.
Well,
right?
See, people have to understand. People don't. I mean, the relationship that we had with John Gotti was different than a lot of other people.
Correct.
So Tony Lee and my father knew John Gotti since he was a kid.
Yeah.
When he was a nobody, he was just a kid in the neighborhood that was stealing pigeons. You know what I mean? So it was a different kind of relationship, and he had a lot of respect for Tony Lee, and he had a lot of respect for my father. Yeah. And Tony Lee was always with him. I mean, Tony Lee, was very tight with him. He was, he was always turning to Tony Lee for advice, and so was Jeannie, his brother Jeannie would come and talk to Tony Lee. Tony was very old school, and they all believed in the same thing, that Neil should have been the boss. They all saw, even my father, even though he was in prison, he believed that Neil should have stepped in and became the boss, which he should have, but he didn't. So, and Tony was in on the whole conspiracy to kill Paul. I mean, he was involved in that whole conspiracy. Yeah. And even after John became the official boss, they actually held all the meetings. After John became the official boss, they had meetings, and Tony Lee's mother lived in Ozone Park, and they had meetings in her basement.
Wow.
And they called in all the family members to go over everything. And they actually had the meetings in Tony Lee's mother's house. So for that to transpire, Tony Lee had a really good position with John. It was very.
I say, no, I'm sorry for going off track. So we're doing something about do something. I say if your father stays healthy, minimum top 3 in the organization, maybe 4 at worst. Like if he stays healthy, top 3 minimum, maybe 4th, because maybe because he struck me as like a super powerful guy, but was no nonsense, no bullshit, almost like a Neil kind of guy, right? And the positive to that is like that's like you need a guy like that on your side, but because they don't kiss ass and play bullshit, they might not get the top spot. But I have him at like top 3 or 4 if he stays healthy. Yeah,
he was feared, and when people, he always told me once, used to tell me that sometimes you could do too much and then people fear you, but John, when I was away, I ran across a couple of wise guys in Schuylkill that were actually in MCC with John when John was fighting the last case with Sammy, and John had made comments to people that if Fat Andy was home, I wouldn't be in this position, meaning he would have probably made my father his underboss, which would have been a really good move for him because he needed someone that could put everything together
by everybody,
right? That was friendly with everybody, that was well respected, and my father fit that to a T.
Well,
and there was a good possibility that would have happened.
Well, your father, and again, this is a short list. I know Nicasio is on there too, but your father would be a guy who would be respected by Bobby Cabert in Jersey, by Brooklyn,
everybody,
by Bronx. Yeah,
my father was known. Listen, my father was known all over the country. When I got married in 1977, I received envelopes from people in Chicago, New Orleans, Buffalo. I mean, the boss of Pennsylvania in the movie The Irishman, the part that Joe Pesci played, Buffalino, he actually came to my wedding.
Come on.
No, I'm serious. Yeah. And not only did he come to my wedding, he was one of the first people to arrive at the hall. I was standing on the balcony looking outside, and I saw a limousine pull up, and he got out of the limousine, and I went inside. I told my father, "Hey, Buffalino just pulled up with a limousine."
Holy shit.
So because my father was good friends with him, every Christmas we used to go to Pennsylvania. He had a big Christmas party, and we would go to it. As a matter of fact, the last Christmas party I went to that he threw, Tony Bennett sang at it.
Jesus.
So, so my father was known
Well, I say if Buffalino was in New York, he would be top 5 of all time. He was that strong. He was that strong where he was.
Yeah, he was
powerful. You know what I mean? And imagine,
he was powerful in Pennsylvania. You know, even in Florida, my father had a little restaurant, a little Italian restaurant in Florida, in Miami. Nice. And you would go in on any given night, and Sam the plumber would be sitting there eating from Jersey. Wow. Joe from Buffalo, Tadera, he would be there. He was the boss of Buffalo. He'd be having dinner. He loved my father. You know, and it got so mobbed up that so many people were coming there. The FBI just walked in one night and took the liquor license right off the wall because they were so mobbed up. You know? So my father was very well known, very respected. I mean, it was unfortunate that he was in prison when all that took place with Paul, because he would have been right in the mix. Yeah, he would have been right in the mix.
Wow. I never get tired talking about it, Anthony. I'm not gonna lie. But anyway, sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. It's all good. So, Pasquale, you on?
He's muted.
Here I am. I'm good. Here I am.
All right, ready to rock, brother.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I'm recording. You guys can keep going if you have more questions, Tom, or if you.
Oh wow! I thought it was a great. I was gonna say it was a great. That was a great national discussion. I don't know if you're gonna post that. But that was like as sincere as I can get, to be honest.
I was recording, and yeah, and that's how when I met Anthony, the first conversation I had, I said, from here on in, we got to record everything you do and say everything out of his mouth.
I'm like that was like a real conversation. I guess I don't know what's the format. Does he ask me questions or I ask him questions?
Exactly what you just did. That's the format. It's just kind of. You know who he is. He knows who you are. And
well, I always, and Anthony, you're welcome to come on the show anytime. But I always wondered. I said a few things. One, your father stays healthy. He's top, 3 or 4. I believe that. Tony Lee, I knew about Florida. Was he the guy who had up the crew before? Like him and Tony Pep were together, or did he leave and then Tony Pep come?
Well, Tony Pep, first of all, was proposed by my father and Tony Lee. He was with them from when he was a teenager. He was with my father and Tony Lee. Tony Pep actually baptized his kids, so they were close. He was closer. Tony Pep was closer to Tony Lee than my father, but he was close to my father also. But Tony Lee more or less serviced him. And when Paul Castellano was executed, he was in on that, Tony Pep. Because he was one of the first guys that John Gotti straightened out. When he became the boss, he was one of the first batch of guys that John made with Arnold, Spateri, and all of them guys. He was in the first batch. So he was always in Florida. He got in a little trouble in New York with John, and he moved to Georgia, and he opened up some stuff.
A movie company, right?
He had a movie company. I knew them. They were based out of Florida, father and son moving company. But so he would go back and forth from Florida to Georgia, to Florida to New York. And my father had a guy with him named Freddie Messina, who was the guy in Miami. And he was always close with Pep from when Pep was with my father. Like if you could follow that from years ago, he was always close to Pep. So when my father passed away, Tony Pep more or less inherited my father's crew in Florida, which was Freddie
Messina.
That's
what I figured, yeah.
Right,
yeah.
Right, yeah.
Wow. Yeah, and then your father, when Gotti was in charge, your father was around, but he wasn't well, correct?
No, when John Gotti was the boss, my father was in prison throughout his whole. When John became the boss, my father was in Miami fighting his case. My father was in MCC in Miami. My father was never home when John was the boss. He was in prison, and when John died. My father had already passed away. John was in prison when my father died.
Yes. Got it. Because they almost
Gotti, when my father came out of jail, my father came out of jail in '98. Pete Gotti was the acting boss.
Got it. And then my understanding, well, a few things. One is with your father, and I probably saw it in your show, so forgive me if I'm misquoting it. Your father was like, this kid's either going to be boss or he's going to get killed.
Yeah, my father used to say that all the time. He used to tell me, there's only 3 things going to happen to John Gotti. He's either going to become the boss, is going to get 100 years in prison or he's going to get shot in the head.
Wow.
That was his prediction for John. It was funny because, you know, when I was in that company, Richie, his brother Richie Gotti, had a cafe around the corner from the Burger Fish Club. And we spent a lot of nights in there. They used to light they used to have fireside chats. They had a fireplace in there, and in the winter they would light a fire, and they would all sit around the fireplace drinking and talking about murders, about who killed more guys and who killed this guy. And it was like a normal, and I used to sit there, and me and my friends would sit there and just like stare at each other. Like they would just talk about like murders, like they were talking about a baseball game. It was like, it was, you know, and you know, and you think it's okay, you know, now I know better, but, you know, but it was, they used to argue, my father and John, about who killed more guys. Like, you know, it's crazy, but that was the life, you know, that was the life.
But then when Peter took over, and again, because I watch your show and I've seen you in interviews, then like he got really shitty with you about money, right?
Yeah,
like,
first of all, I mean, I don't want to talk bad about the dead, but he had no business being even never mind a boss, being straightened out. He was a sanitation worker. He was never a criminal. He didn't know how to create anything. You know, yeah. So what happened was a couple of things happened. Before I took over a vending company, and when I had a problem with this kid that was with the Genovese family, and he was going on the route and he was taking the money.
Oh, so wow.
I had to go to Pete and tell Pete what was going on. And I told Pete, if this guy keeps going on my route, I'm going to fucking kill him. And Pete went like this, and covered his ears. He didn't want to hear it. But fast forward. So yeah, so what happened was right before my father got released from prison in 1990, in 97, my sister got into a car accident with a limousine in the neighborhood.
Oh, yes.
Right. And the limousine company, the owners were with Pete. So my father called up Mikey Gal, who was Tony Lee's brother, because at this time, Tony Lee, unfortunately, had passed away. Yeah. So my father was partners with his brother, Mikey, who was also a wise guy. And he told Mikey, my daughter got into an accident. And Mikey says, yeah, I know. Pete and I took care of it. So my father goes, oh, great, that's good, thanks. You know, tell Pete thanks.
Yeah.
So now my father gets out of prison, and he's home, and he's in the yard, and Mikey Gal walks in the driveway, and my father says, what are you doing here? You're on my restricted list. I'm going to get, what do you want? You know, you're going to get me violated. So he goes, well, Pete sent me. Now, at the time, Pete was the acting boss. So my father said, Pete sent you. What does he want? And Mikey Gal handed him a paper. And my father opened it up, and it was an invoice for $1,800. So my father said, what's this? He said, Pete says you owe him $1,800 for your daughter's car accident. Now, my father just came out of jail. He was broke. My father goes, what, are you kidding me? He goes, you told me you took care of this. He folded it up. He gave it back to Mikey, and he told Mikey, you tell Pete that I said, if he wants me to pay this, ask him which street corner he wants me to wait on, and I'll wait there for him.
Wow.
So now at that point, it's, you know, you're gonna have
to. That's war at that time.
Now he's like telling him, listen, you know, you're gonna kill me, or I'm gonna kill you. I'm not, you know, this is, you know, which was totally disrespecting my father. But that's who Pete was. He was a money hungry. Was no good, Pete. Unfortunately, he was just grabbing money. He was just a greedy bastard. So I mean, here's a guy that did, you know, 13 years in prison. He's a wise guy since the 50s. You know him all your life. You're worried about a stinking $1,800. You should have gave him money. Never mind asking for money.
Yeah, I was going to say, usually I thought he came out.
Right.
So
Mikey says, what, are you kidding me? You really want me to tell him that? My father goes, yeah. So he tells him. Pete never says nothing. 18 months later, or 17 months later, my father dies. I'm in prison. I'm in school killed, doing the bid. I'm in jail. I get a visit from this kid that worked for me with my vending company. He comes in, he goes, listen, I got bad news for you. So what's that? He goes, Pete Gotti sent me. I said, Pete Gotti sent me? What does he want? He said, he told me your father owes him $1,800 and he wants you to pay him. I almost fell out of the chair.
I said, what? You can't make
this up. Are you kidding me? He goes, no. I said, he wants me to pay him $1,800. I says, what did you do? He goes, I paid him. I said, you paid him? Because I would have never paid him.
Correct.
I would have told him, I would have never paid him.
Well, the kid doesn't, you know,
the kid got scared. So the kid took the money out of the business and the kid paid him.
Wow.
Now I go back into prison and now there's all wise guys in there, bosses, all, you know, and I go in there and they see I'm like aggravated and, you know, what's going on? You know, like Sally Avellino was in there. He was driver. He was in there. Anthony Bowat was in there. You know, Frankie Bones, who's the underboss now of the Crazy family. All these guys are in Schuylkill with me. And I'm telling them what happened. And they're like just shaking their head, go, how could he do something like that? You know, how? And then I go on the phone and I call up a wise guy that I know in Ozone Park, and I tell him, hey, what's going on here? What is this guy kidding me? He took $1,800 off me. Does he know I'm in jail? He goes, Anthony, he's doing it to everybody. Because at that point in time, he was a guy, Pete, that never did a day in jail.
Correct.
So he didn't have no conception of what it was to be in prison. He never did a day in jail. So, you know, and those were all the things that led up to me deciding to, like, that life wasn't for me anymore. Like, you know, you just don't do that to people. You know, you just you don't take money off people that are in prison. You know, if you were really a tough guy and really a gangster, you would have sent for my father and say, listen, Andy, I want my money. And then, you know, but he didn't do that because he knew, he knew it was the company, he knew what kind of guy my father was, and he dogged it. Plain and simple.
Well, I'm glad, and hopefully this makes sense, because this is something I've always wanted to say. So, you know, I cover the business end of things, and at the end of the day, it's a business. In the 80s, the Gambino family minimum, because they have to estimate, was making a minimum $500 million a year back then, between probably about 800 made guys or whatever it was, 500, whatever it was, plus thousands of associates. And they said if it was a company, it would be on the Fortune 500, right? So now you have Gotti come in and respectfully was a different manager, if you will, than Castellano, kind of really hurt the family from a business and do Sammy and everything, right? Hurt it from a business and from a stature standpoint. But then, you know, this, Anthony, the next boss you need to come in has got to turn this shit around. He's got to, like, come in and say, you know what? Like, okay, we had a bad run. We had some, you know, an informant. We had X, Y, and Z. We got to fix this. By installing Peter, I'm actually going to make a bold statement that Peter probably had more of a negative effect than John, because he was there to turn it around and he made it much worse. He screwed it up so bad. I think it took about 10 to 15 years to recover because of their combined mismanagement, in my opinion.
And that's part of it. And another part of it, and the reason why Peter did become the official boss, was because at that time there was so much heat around. Nobody really wanted to be the boss. Even though there was people that were more, you know, had more intelligence than Peter, more business sense than Peter. For Peter Gotti to become the boss at that point in time, it was because nobody wanted to step up and take the reins, because honestly, you have a target on your back. And Pete, you know, wasn't the sharpest pencil in the box. And you're right, he did hurt it. You know, John put it on Front Street. John was a very intelligent guy.
I actually think he doesn't get a lot of credit.
He was a very, you know, I used to laugh with him because he used to read the dictionary. Like, and I used to tell him, how do you read the dictionary? I was telling him, what are you reading? You know, what are you reading? Or what did you read? You know, when you were in MCC, what did you read? Did you read any good books? And he would tell me, you know, I read the dictionary. You read the dictionary because, you know, I want to learn new words. You know, like the guy, you know, I never read the dictionary, and I read a zillion books in jail, you know, and he was very, you know, Machiavelli-ish. He loved Machiavelli, you know, he lived by Machiavelli, you know, and he was very intelligent. The only thing that he did wrong was his ego. He was an egomaniac, and he put everybody on Front Street. He put me on Front Street, and I was a nobody. I went to jail because I was his friend. You know, every time I got arrested, my name was linked up with his name and my father's name. It was always Anthony Ruggiano Jr., the son of Fat Andy Ruggiano, John Gotti, it was always hooked up with John Gotti. You know, but you're right. Pete didn't help the cause. He hurt it more than he helped it. He was just grabbing money from whatever he could grab for himself. He was grabbing. He wasn't making anybody earn. He wasn't creating anything. And today, I don't even know how they make money today. I mean, because it's a whole different world out there. I don't know what like these kids they're straightening out today, they're not even criminals. I mean, I was a criminal. I committed crimes all day long.
Correct.
You know what I mean? I made a lot of money. I spent it all, but I made tons of money.
Yeah.
It's just a different world today, but you're right about Pete.
Now, one question I have is, because you obviously went a different direction. If you think about a table that you sat at 20 years ago, right, that had friends of yours on it that were in the life, right? How many of them, and you don't have to say names of any current, but how many of them are actually okay, striving, doing well, versus who's dead, who's in jail, who's miserable? You know what I mean? Like how did your peers make out versus the path you took?
Not very good.
Yeah.
Not very good. No, I mean, they all did a lot of time. I mean, like they're out there now. They're in the street now. I mean, I don't know how they're doing, but everybody did. They all did. We all went to prison. I mean, all my fathers went through. They went to prison. Who's dead? Not well. I would say not well. I mean, Nicky Carraz is still out there striving. Joe's brother's very ill. I heard he's got a little bit of dementia. I mean, they had positions. He was the consigliere, Nicky was the actor. I mean, they did good. They made it in that life. They made it as far up as you could possibly get. But at the end of the day, nobody fared well. I mean, the guys out there now, I don't, now the Sicilian faction, from what I understand, they have control again. The guys from Bensonhurst and Bay Ridge, they're controlling it again. I know a couple of them. Them must be making plenty of money, I'm sure, but my friends that I came up with, not good. I think, mostly the reason for that is because we were all around John.
Good point. Was your father Sicilian?
No, my father was Napolitan.
Which is funny, because even to this day, the Camorra, the Napolitan mob, is perceived as being flashier.
Yeah, right.
Like that's why, like, a lot of people like that I talk to that kind of know Italian lineage, a lot of these guys too,
right.
And they said they would have told you never to put a Napolitan in charge. Like, and for example, the Calabrians are also very low key,
right?
But yet Nicky Scarfa was Calabrian, but he was very, so it's like that's why I think the Sicilians to this day are, and you said it, are running it a different way. Right. Maybe not as powerful, but they're running it the way they need to run it. They're making a ton of money. You never see headlines.
Yes. Yeah. I tell you, I have a funny story about Napolitans and Sicilians. So John Gotti's family, my father's family, the Ruggianos, and John Gotti's family come from the same town in Naples.
Oh, San Giuseppe di Vesuviano or something like that?
San Giuseppe di Gotti. Gotti took the last name. The Gotti family took the last name of the town. So I don't even know what John Gotti's real last name is. It's Sant'Agata de Gotti. I have the paperwork. It says right on it, Sant'Agata de Gotti.
Oh, shit.
So evidently the Gottis took the name of the town, which a lot of people did on Ellis Island.
Get some Irish guy who I hear you Godfather.
Gave them the name because couldn't pronounce the name, so just gave them the name of the town.
Oh, shit.
And John's father, John Sr., used to always call my father Paisan because they came from the same town. My father's family came from the same town as him. So when John's Napolitan. So when John became the boss, Jimmy Brown, who was a powerful captain out of
Jeff Ayala,
big pop, was Sicilian. He made a remark to John about Napolitans, like, F these Napolitans, now us Sicilians got to stick together, not knowing, assuming that John was Sicilian. John didn't say nothing. I know the story, right? So a day later, John, all by himself, went to Brooklyn to Jimmy Brown's club by himself. Now he's the boss. And he walked in Jimmy Brown's club and he said, "Could I speak to you?" And he takes Jimmy Brown outside and he tells him, "Listen, I want to tell you something." He said, "I'm Napolitan."
Wow.
Jimmy Brown almost fainted.
Probably turned white.
Yeah, he almost fainted. And then, John said, "So, watch what you say about shit with your remarks." He told him, he goes, "Because I'm Napolitan." Jimmy Brown almost fainted right in the spot.
And he was a powerful guy too. And he still was
And that was the Sicilian crew out there, Jimmy Brown. Yeah, that was, So it's funny because they always, and Neil and Carlo Gambino was a real Sicilian. I mean, he was born and raised in, he came from Sicily, Castellano. But my mother was Sicilian.
Oh, wow.
My mother was Sicilian. My parents came from Sicily.
Wow. So your uncle threw your mom down the steps?
No, my uncle, my brother-in-law. He didn't throw her down the steps. He was choking her. Now, I don't know where that came from that he threw her down the steps.
Okay.
He was choking her. And my ex-wife ran down the steps and jumped on him.
Yeah. But this is what I don't get. And maybe you can answer this for me. So like, I'll just take a regular Italian family. Okay. So just regular civilian Italian family, right? And there's always BS going on. Right? Then you take like a mobbed up family, right? You would think you don't touch the mobbed up family people because you're going to end up dead. Like, because you don't do that in an Italian family. Somebody will kill you, let alone being related to Andy Ruggiano. Like, what was he thinking?
Well, evidently he wasn't thinking. I mean, he knew she was Fat Andy's daughter.
Yeah.
He knew his best friend, Peter Sicara, from day one told him to stay away from her. Don't get involved with her. She's Andy's daughter. Correct. Stay away from her. But this is what he used to do. He was a bad kid. He was a dangerous kid. He was a street kid. And he dated wise guys' daughters and nieces because he thought that would be a shield for him.
Got it.
So he thought that would be a shield for him. He dated Sonny Francise's daughter, the one that passed away. He dated her. He dated Danny Marino's niece.
Wow.
Actually, Danny Marino actually came to us and told me and Tony Lee, tell your sister to stay away from this kid. He's no good.
Yeah. Danny Marino is one of the few guys, and I'm not going to say anything negative. This, I guess, is a positive. Is it one of the few guys that when you look at and he looks at you, he looks through you.
Yeah. So he told us to stay away from, for him, how to stay away from, but of course they didn't. She didn't, and then the end result was, he was killed. Unfortunately, he did what he did, and he knew the consequences, and it wasn't like he was not a legitimate kid. He knew the deal. Like, I had after that, like my sister went off a little bit off the deep end. So she got involved with this kid named Chris, who was a neighborhood kid, but he was a drug addict. And they were out there riding around in a stolen car with stolen credit cards. And my sister got arrested with him. And my father wanted us to kill the kid. And I told my father no. And I actually had an argument with my father because I didn't want to kill him. My father actually got mad at me because I didn't want to do it. And the reason why I didn't want to do it was because he wasn't like the husband. Frankie knew the deal. This kid don't know that this kid was a neighbor kid. He was a kid from the street. He wasn't mobbed up. He was a legitimate kid that took drugs, that was just out trying to get high. So he didn't know anything about wise guys or anything like that. So I gave him a pass because I knew what he was doing. He was looking to get high, looking for the next one, like all drug addicts do. Drug addicts' lives are about the next high, the next hit, the next, the next shot. So I gave him a pass, but her husband, he knew the deal. He knew better.
And then Castellano killed like not one, but two people that was like messing with his daughter, right? Like a boyfriend?
Arnil, wow. Not Castellano. Arnil, yeah. Yeah, a couple of people, yeah. Wow. Yeah. One, two that I know of. Wow. One we were actually involved in because my father, the kid hung out with us, this kid Louis Baja, he hung out with us. So my father took the contract or whatever, and he was shot, but he didn't die on the scene. He died a while later from his wounds.